Christopher Mcquarrie,
Yeah.
we are live.
All right.
We are
Thank you.
broadcasting live because we wanted to make sure that it was working. So I'm going to do a very brief intro, and then we're going to get right down to business. Some of the members were crying out for Jack Reacher to solve this problem. So thankfully, it managed to work out. All right, so welcome to the Inside Pitch. I'm Chris Lockhart. This is our first live interview, and we are starting at the very top. I'm joined by group co-admin Ramesh Santaham. Ramesh, say hello.
Hi, everyone.
And I want to thank him for producing this event today. And Ramesh and I want to give a shout out to our other admin, Steve Enlow, for his hard work and devotion to the group. And of course, we want to thank all of our members for participating and helping out your fellow artists day in and day out in this group. All right, so if there is such a thing as having a perfect career in Hollywood, our guest today has come pretty damn close. He started as a screenwriter, winning a Best Original Screenplay Academy Award, amongst other accolades, for The Usual Suspects, which became an instant classic. He made his directing debut with his screenplay for The Way of the Gun. He co-wrote and directed Jack Reacher, and has recently been writing, directing, producing the Mission Impossible movies, one of the most successful film franchises in movie history. Now, you may have noticed a common denominator in these titles is Tom Cruise, who very well may be, and this is not hyperbole, the greatest movie star who has ever lived, and with whom our guest has forged a successful creative relationship. One last thing I can say about our guest is an observation from your comments on the Inside Pitch leading up to this event, which is that he has clearly earned the admiration and respect from creative artists around the world. Here is producer, writer, director, and Oscar winner, Christopher Mcquarrie.
I cannot possibly live up to that intro.
Well, you already have.
My apologies in advance.
You already have. You already have. The group is really excited. I mean, when Ramesh said to me, "Hey, you know, you've been wanting to do an interview series for a long time. How about Chris Mcquarrie?" I finally got off my ass and was like, "Yes, absolutely." So, you know, you clearly your work, your sort of scope, your experience in the business is really inspiring to a lot of people. We have people from Malta, for God's sakes. I mean, you have touched people in Malta. So it's pretty impressive.
That's farther than I ever thought I would go.
Exactly, right? So I just wanted to start off with a current event question, which is that your latest film, Mission Impossible 7, I believe, had to halt production in Italy because of COVID.
Yes.
So what is it like to have to stop a freight train of a movie like that? And how are you handling it? And are you working toward filming again soon?
Yes. Well, in the case of a movie like Mission Impossible, where we're constantly in a state of measured panic, and we're kind of making up the movie as we go along. We have a very set plan, but we're always improvising and we're always changing things on the day. Having the movie suddenly stop is actually something not only that doesn't intimidate us, it's something we've had happen before. Tom broke his ankle. Rogue Nation shut down for 10 days. Ghost Protocol shut down for 2 weeks, all for different reasons. And one of the things we have learned from all of that, and it's an expression we say on the movie all the time, is disaster is an opportunity to excel. When something goes wrong, you don't panic, you don't freak out. You start to look at the silver lining of whatever it is. And the negatives were obviously we were gonna miss our release date. We had an actor conflict that couldn't be resolved. There were certain things where it definitely had a negative impact on the movie. But the positive impact on that is many, many, many things that we could only just prepare turned out to be things that we had a great deal more time to prepare them. The trick then was keeping pre-production going. We had actually not started shooting. We were 2 days away from shooting. So technically we were in the last few days, even the last 36 hours of pre-production when the movie shut down. So then to maintain that, to convince the studio to hold on to key crew, and to keep developing and to keep moving forward, because we knew that if we stopped, two things were going to happen. One, 3, 6, 8, 10 months from now, we were going to have to start up again, and all of that prep time was going to start all over. And two, morale. People were really, it had a profound effect on people's emotional state, that you were in such a state of that close to ready to go, and everything stops that suddenly. I would liken that to probably sitting in the space shuttle and waiting for it to take off, and 10 seconds before launch they pulled the plug.
Right. Wow.
It was that feeling. So everybody spent, we obviously Zoom and technology like this enabled us all to keep communicating every day, and we implemented a plan whereby we would meet every single day, and at the end of that meeting we would figure out what the next day's meeting was, and everyone learned everybody else's department. Everybody learned the things you can't learn when you're making a movie, and you're only hearing about secondhand that this department is not getting something to this department, or there's a disagreement between these two departments, there's a miscommunication between two departments. We worked all of that out. And then the big benefit was we actually had a chance to write a screenplay, which we didn't have 2 days before we moved it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So because there are some members of the group who have heard that you're not really working with the screenplay in these Mission Impossible movies. That can't be true.
It is very true. To the extent that it is true, it depends on the movie. In the case of Ghost Protocol, they had a full screenplay when I came on board, and we blew it up. We threw out everything that they had yet to shoot. We couldn't change what they had shot. But imagine coming into a movie 10 weeks into a 17-week shoot and looking at all the assets you have, all the assets you have yet to employ, roles you have yet to cast, scenes you have yet to shoot, sets you have yet to build, and sets you have yet to strike, locations you have yet to find, and essentially take the material that's there and look at it not as the movie you were trying to make, but actually the movie you had made. And it's another thing that we like to say all the time. Prep is the movie you want to make. Production is the movie you think you're making, and post is the movie you've made. We've now flipped that whole thing around, and we are prepping the movie we think we're making. But we know enough to not believe that that's what we're doing. We go in with a very set plan, and we know the genre well enough to know that there are certain tropes, there are certain boxes you have to tick. But we also know going in, hey, let's leave ourselves the latitude here. We can take this opportunity to find a character rather than having to write one specifically and get locked into it. And it gives the actors a lot of freedom. So in the case of Rogue Nation, I didn't have the trust of the studio, and they were pushing very hard for a finished screenplay, even if it meant writing a screenplay that they knew we would never shoot. They really just wanted the security of a document. Going into Fallout, I recognized that created more problems than it solved. It actually got people stuck on certain ideas that we were never going to use. They couldn't unthink them. They couldn't get it out of their head. So I said, okay, I'm just going to give an outline this time. And even the outline created expectations that people could not unlearn. And they would keep going back to things. They would keep bringing me designs that were referring to an outline and scenes that were just placeholders. So when they came to me to do 7 and 8, And ironically, they needed me to start right away. They needed me to start the next month if we were going to make our proposed release date. I said, if you need me to start shooting the movie, if you need me to deliver the movie by this date, I have to start scouting next week. And they said, how are you going to scout without a script? And I said, truthfully, Mission Impossible, you can't write a script without a location. So let me go find the locations first, figure out where the movie's taking place, what the action scenes are, and then I'll tell you what the movie is. And that's what we've been doing.
That to me just sounds like it is so anxiety ridden.
The first time you do it, yes, absolutely. And like anything, I mean, the first time you make a feature film, the first, I don't care how prepared you are, it's terrifying. And you think you know what you're doing. You don't find out until the editing room that you don't know what you're doing. And we've simply learned to embrace that. A plan is not a guarantee of success, and chaos is not a guarantee of failure. And we don't create chaos deliberately. We just embrace the notion that it's coming. It's going to happen. There's going to be the unexpected. Somebody's going to break their ankle. Some rig is going to break down. You're going to lose a location the day before you shoot there. When you walk into a movie knowing that there is going to be a certain degree of chaos, you're not caught off guard when it comes, and you've already started thinking about, well, what would I do? What would I do if I couldn't do that? So everything that I do now, where it used to be I would go in and try to maximize the scope of a given location, I look at a location now and go, where can I get, how much of this can I shoot in the least amount of time, kind of get the beautiful big scope shots of it, and then make sure that the stuff that I owe at the end is the small stuff that I can recreate back on a stage. And you watch Mission Impossible, all of the exposition in the movie, all of the things that is the hardest stuff to figure out, which are the reasons why things are happening. You learn all that information in cars and in phone booths and in small restaurants. You learn them in locations that we can recreate and reshoot that information again and again and again. You'll also notice when they're out running around the streets of Paris, they're not saying a lot. And as a result, that means I know I put a critical line of dialogue in Ethan Hunt's mouth while Ethan Hunt is driving around the Arc de Triomphe at 60 miles an hour. I better be pretty damn sure that line is important to be in the movie. And what Tom and I have learned to do over the course of 3 of these movies together now is we're constantly striving to make a silent film. We're pushing harder and harder with each film to find ways to make movies where the dialogue doesn't matter. And dialogue to me is an incredibly, as a guy who started with a very dialogue heavy script and still write very dialogue heavy scripts because of the exposition I'm forced to write, I'm extremely suspicious of dialogue and consider dialogue to be a last resort rather than a first wave of storytelling.
Wow.
Someone asked you, how can you budget when you do stuff like this?
It's a very good question. In the case of Mission, we budget for time. We understand, and obviously resources. So the cities that I'm shooting in, I know what the action scenes in those cities are. Because I'm developing the action first. When I go to a city, what happens primarily, what used to happen, is I would create an action scene, and then we would find a location, and then I would have to rewrite the action scene to fit that location. Then you would lose that location, or you would run out of time at that location, and things would change on you. And that's a lot of extra steps. So what I do now is I go to a city with no preconceived notion as to what the action scene is going to be, and I let the city tell me what the action would be. So when I went to Paris, we had an idea of a breakout, but we didn't really know if a car chase was going to work or not. And it wasn't until I took a ride along the river and went into this tunnel that went under Paris that I realized, and I looked up and I saw these skylights going into the tunnel. I knew, I know exactly how this car chase is going to end, and I worked backwards from there. Once you do that, you very quickly start acquiring resources. You're coming up with big ideas, you're coming up with gags, and you're rounding up all the best looking streets in Paris where you dream of having a car chase. As they start to give you those resources and you start to figure out how many cars do I have, how many motorcycles do I need, is he in a car in the scene or is he in a motorcycle in this scene? The budget very quickly starts to come together, and we allocate a certain portion of the movie, understanding that X number of scenes have to be on a stage at Leavesden Studios, because that's where our crew base is, and that's where we get our tax incentives for shooting in the UK. You have to shoot a certain number of days. That means a certain number of set builds, and we also know certain characters are not going to be in Paris or New Zealand. They're just going to be in London. And it all starts to come together without your ever really knowing what necessarily the plot of your movie is. Plot doesn't matter. Plot's kind of irrelevant. What matters is story. And when we think story, we think in terms of character. Most people now, when they think story, they think in terms of plot. They think, why are the things in the story happening? What are the, what are the big objectives, and why are all these pieces moving? We don't really think that way. That stuff comes up as a matter of course. We start to say, okay, well, Ethan is in this location, he meets this character, and they have this scene together. That's about the two of them as people. Why were they there in the first place? And so plot comes in at the very, very end. It's big logistical questions first. Second is character development. And then third is, okay, let's come up with a reason why all this is happening.
So when you started your career, is this the way you thought? And if not, then what was the evolution? What was the arc?
The evolution, it's a very good question. I mean, when my first film as a director was The Way of the Gun, and I didn't even understand budgets. I didn't understand schedules. I didn't understand how long it took me to shoot a scene. And what I also didn't understand about The Way of the Gun is that cinematography has as much to do with the writer as it does to do with the director. That the way you write a scene will determine in many ways how that scene has to be shot. It'll determine how that scene has to be edited if that scene is to be coherent. Location has as much to do with cinematography. Where you choose to shoot a scene will provide opportunities or limitations for a cinematographer. And so all of those things are interrelated. I didn't know any of that. I didn't understand any of that. I wrote a script, and then I did what writers do when they make the transition from being a writer to director. I shot the screenplay. I didn't really direct the movie. And over the course of not only directing my own material, but producing other people's movies, editing other people's movies, fixing movies that were broken, and having a certain emotional attachment from those movies, I started to understand how those things interrelated. And so I would say to any writer that it's probably more important that when you study movies that you really love, it's less about studying the writing and it's more about studying the way the scenes are shot, the way they're edited, the locations where they take place. You go look at your favorite movie ever made, and and it's a mystery to you why that movie looks good. When you make movies long enough, you start to understand there's a very simple formula behind why those things look that good. It's just for certain filmmakers that aesthetic is not a priority, and for other filmmakers that aesthetic is the only priority. And so what we're trying to do all the time is create a balance between those priorities. How do I make it look like a big movie but feel like a proper story and not a big dumb action?
Wow. So would you write a script like The Usual Suspects today, or is that in your past?
No, God, no. Oh, yeah. I would do that in a second if I could come up with that kind of ending. I mean, Suspects all came together because of the ending, and it was it was very crystalline in its execution because of that ending. Everything that happened in the story was simply a matter of delivering on that ending. I've
So
never
you
had
started with that ending?
Yes,
Okay.
I started with the title, then the poster, then the ending of the movie, then the beginning of the movie, which I had actually written a long time prior as a scene to some other idea, and I didn't know where to start Suspects. So I took this old scene that I'd written. It was a beginning with no ending, and then I took an ending with no beginning, and I put them together and I connected the two, and that's how Suspects came together. It really didn't matter. And if you watch Suspects, you'll notice it doesn't have a beginning. It starts in a flashback and a B story. The story has no real legitimate beginning point. It begins after the story has started. The whole movie is about an ending.
How do other writers, your colleagues, feel about your philosophy toward writing now?
Um,
Do you get some blowback from them?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not, what I hope that what I'm saying doesn't come off as though I'm devaluing writing. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to empower writers to be a more necessary and involved part of the process. Writers are taught to take themselves out very early on. Writers are taught that you write a screenplay and you sell that screenplay, and then miraculously a producer gets a director attached to it, and then somehow they find financing and they shoot the movie that you wrote, which sounds to me like hitting the lottery many, many, many times in a row. The problem with that is that writers are neither taught how to engineer movies, and more importantly, they're taught a lot of bad habits by executives in terms of executing stories that are based on plot and reasons and answering the question why. Executives tend to be like children in that phase of life who just keep asking why. Why is, why things are happening is not really important. Why the big events of a story are happening are much less important than why is the character acting out a certain way within that. I'm much more interested in why characters are doing what they're doing than what the plot of the movie is. So what I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to create some kind of a syllabus, some kind of a breakdown, so that writers are able to understand the engineering of a movie and how to write movies instead of screenplays. Writers really aren't taught to write movies. They're taught to write scripts. They're taught to write documents that sell and get made. But then once you attach a director, one of two things happen. Either the director has to change them because they're not really shootable as movies in that form, or more often than not, the director changes them because if you tell a director something is black, when you show up on the set that day, it's going to be red. If you tell them it's white, it's going to be green. They're going to do what they want to do. And it's taken me years to develop material in such a way that now I can stand on a set and hand pages to a director and say, you can try to change these pages, but you can't. You just can't. If you want to get where the director gives me a series of criteria, and I take those criteria and I put them in an order, and they say, well, I don't want to do this because I've seen this in other movies. And say, great, take it out. But then the whole scene doesn't make any sense. It's enormously good fun. Where it used to be, I would be on the set as the writer watching a director mangle my script, sometimes for the better. Now I get to go on script and I get to watch directors tangle with my pages and try to change them, and they're not able to. That's because what I'm doing is I'm writing a movie. I'm writing an editable, actionable plan. Any writer who's listening to me right now, you'll gain a lot more knowledge by studying editing than you will by studying screenwriting. Screenwriting is something inside of you. It's what you're going to do, and it's going to be dictated by so many other things. Watch how movies are built. That's where it really comes together. Watch how movies evolve through the process of editing.
Yeah, I always say movies are not, they are not written, they're constructed. And because they're built. And
They're written three times. It's written once on film. It's written once on the page, once on film,
and then in
and
the
once.
editing room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the writer rather, comes back to that process. And again, what writers are taught to do is they're taught to hang on desperately with both hands and to remain involved in the process any way they can. Well, the problem is that when you're doing that, people's natural inclination is to get rid of you. Nobody wants that person who's desperate to be at the party. It took me 20 years to learn the easiest way to make sure that you never get fired off of a movie is do everything you can to get off the movie as quickly as possible. And you will, and because the movie becomes like glue, you cannot escape. And what happens then is you make yourself invaluable to the process. You become a person who's there moving it along. I'm also not interested, once I've written the screenplay and handed it over to somebody else, if I'm not directing it, it's their movie. And if they want to change it, they can change it. And I support them and I do everything I can to help them do that. I'm no longer about, oh, I wrote the scene this way. It would have been so much better like that. What I'm about is my time. When I see a director making choices that are going to force me to have to rewrite the scene, reshoot the scene, do it again, that's where I become very sensitive and say, you can do that, but then I'm going to leave because you're wasting my time. And I watch writers all the time. They fight for extra steps. They fight for wanting to be invited to the set. They fight for all of these things that frankly don't matter. You can't arbitrate and make people want you to stay. You can produce for people. The more productive you are, the more people want you there. And if people don't want you there, get out. Why would you want to be standing around on a movie with people seeing you not doing things? Let them miss you. And if you're a writer worth your salt, you will have other ideas. Move on to the next thing.
I think I'm going to add iconoclast to your bio now.
Finally,
you've earned it. One of our members has a COVID question. David Shatoovich wants to know, should spec scripts acknowledge or ignore COVID? Meaning, should our characters be wearing masks and interacting in a post-COVID world?
Somebody else's problem. It's because, frankly, you'll write a script, and by the time that script gets read, a year will have passed, and the COVID fad, et cetera. If you have a script like Contagion that takes great advantage of that, or a script wherein COVID plays a key part in the narrative, great, go ahead and do that. I wouldn't. I mean, I'm not. I'm having these meetings extensively right now where I have scenes with, in a perfect world, potentially hundreds of extras, but I don't actually know what the COVID rules are. So the position I'm now taking is, you guys have to tell me. I'm not going to write this scene and you tell me how I have to shoot it. Don't make me write the scene twice. Don't make me write a scene, plan a scene, and then when I show up there, you're going to tell me that I actually can't have extras in my scene. I'll just wait until you tell me what the rules are. I'm somebody who likes rules. I'm somebody who likes boundaries. They force me to be creative. So if I would never recommend that you impose rules on yourself that you don't need to. You'll find you impose enough rules on yourself consciously and unconsciously without having to add any more.
Thank you. A lot of our members are curious about how you collaborate with Tom Cruise. So what does that look like?
So Tom communicates largely in emotional terms. Tom is very clear in his thinking about what he wants the audience to feel in a given scene, a given moment, sense of tone in the movie. And so Tom comes at it in a very general sense of what he wants the audience to feel. Now, sometimes that'll involve Tom expressing an idea where I don't really get it. I don't really understand what the idea is. but I look at the feeling behind the note that he's reaching for and say, okay, I know how to construct that in a way that's actually workable. We can actually execute it. It's not an abstraction. It becomes a concrete execution of an idea. So, so everything we do, like for example, in the case of Fallout, Tom had at the very beginning, he said, okay, what do you want to do? And I said, if I'm going to make another Mission Impossible, I want Ethan to go on an emotional journey. I want to make a story. We discovered little things in Rogue Nation that were surprisingly more emotional than we ever expected them to be. And what I said to him was, I want to embrace that. I want to take the lessons we learned from that. I want to make a movie like that intentionally. What do you want to do? And he said, I want to clear up the story of Julia, because people are still asking me about Julia when I promote the movie. Now, I want to give them a satisfying conclusion to that story. I feel like they are still, the fans of the franchise are unsatisfied by that story. And I said, great. If you want to give them that satisfaction, you can't just have Ethan go visit Julia somewhere and tie up their relationship and then go back to the story, because you're going to cut that out of the movie. We've made enough movies to know, no matter how well written the scene is, that scene is going to end up on the cutting room floor. This means that if you want Julia in the story has to go like a train right through your relationship with Julia. And that means there are 5 scenes in the movie before the movie is even started. You have to begin the movie with Ethan dreaming about Julia, because we have to reintroduce her as a character and how Ethan feels about her, whatever those feelings are. We know there's going to be a dream somewhere else in the movie to remind you about Julia, because in the midst of all the other crazy action, we're going to forget about her. We need a scene where somebody tells somebody the story of Ethan and Julia, and I think it would be great to have Luther do that, because he never gets to do scenes like that. And it would be great if he's telling Ilsa, because that's going to be fraught with a certain kind of tension. And then at the end of the movie, in the third act of the film, he's got to run into Julia at the most inopportune time, and we understand what her life is. And I think it would be great if she was married to another guy, maybe even had a kid with another guy. We tried that. We came very close to doing that. We almost had a baby in that scene. Would have been a nightmare. And then at the end of the movie, some resolution to their story, something that lets them off the hook. That became the story of Mission Impossible Fallout, all coming from Tom going, I want to give the audience this sense of satisfaction to this little thing. He didn't say make the whole movie about Ethan and Julia. He just said, this is the thing I want to give them. And with every sequence that I present to Tom, Tom's always looking for Ethan's journey within the sequence. He's not going, what do I, Tom Cruise, get to do? He's always looking at it in terms of what's driving Ethan through this scene? What is creating pressure on Ethan? What keeps me in Ethan's point of view? What's Ethan doing in the scene to either affect the events around him or in response to events that are affecting him? And that's how we build those stories layer by layer by layer. So the opera sequence, for example, I came to Tom and I went to Paris for the weekend and came back having gone to the National Academy in Paris and said, that's a great idea. Let's do an opera sequence. And he thought that was a terrible idea. He thought the opera was going to be this very boring, very kind of, he'd seen a bunch of opera scenes lately. And he was like, really, do we have to have opera in the movie? And I said, trust me, here's how it's going to go. And then we started to build this thriller around the opera. So the opera scene is actually not about the opera. It's set at the opera. The opera is very much the backdrop to the story. What matters in the story is the emotions driving Ethan, and namely his reconnecting with Ilsa. The opera was originally supposed to be the opening of the movie, but we realized that the opera would have a lot more value if he had met that woman before. And that's how the shape of the movie took place. We like a scene, and then we say, well, what would make the scene better is if these scenes happen before it. And Mission kind of grows from there.
What do you think it is about you that Tom Cruise has so attached to your talent? What is it that you've brought to the table that Tom really connects with? Because clearly he does, and he trusts you.
We get along very well, and we were actually just talking about this. He said, and that's why we get along. It's our first priority is story. We don't have another agenda. It's very easy to look at a movie star and presume why that movie star is doing what they're doing. Tom really likes to make big movies for the widest audience possible, and he does that through story. He cares first and foremost about story, and so do I. So and in that we can be quite ruthless when, especially when working with other filmmakers, where I'm working more as a writer and a producer. I don't care how much you like a shot. I don't care how much time you spent shooting it. I don't care how much effort you put into it. I promise you, I have put more effort into something that I have cut out of my movie like that. And so I will be there standing next to the filmmaker and saying, you could shoot this, but you're going to cut it out of the movie. It's just not going to be there, but go ahead and shoot it. And then when we're in the cutting room and looking at it and saying, watch what happens when you take that out. It's gone, and the movie gets better. And most importantly, I think the reason Tom and I get along so well is there is no end to it. There's not a day where the film is finished. Top Gun has not come out yet. Tom and I are still working on Top Gun. We are still watching the movie over and over and over again, talking about music, talking about cues, rethinking, and trying as best we can to step back from the movie and look at it the way you would look at it as somebody who didn't make it and doesn't care, and has to be made to care. And it's looking at our movies with a kind of wide-angle vision that says, I don't care how much work I put into it or how important it is. Does an audience care? Does an audience care when they're coming from work that day? And how do I get them to stop thinking about work and focusing on my movie? That's all we care about. We care about, and this is the really important thing. It's an important choice of words. The word is not entertainment, because everybody has their own definition of whatever entertainment is, and some people think that that's frivolous, and some people just think that's tacky and don't want to do it. The word is engagement. I don't care what kind of movie you're making. I don't care what filmmaker you are. If I'm not engaged, why are we even here? Why are we watching the movie? Unless I'm here to watch you, show me what you can do. What matters most to me is that an audience comes to the film and they're engaged from the first second of the movie until the last second of the movie, and they didn't think about the movie until after the movie is over. I don't want you thinking during the film. I want you feeling during the film. I want you experience during the film. If you're doing any kind of thinking, I want you trying to guess where the movie is going. And most importantly, I want you to guess what I want you to guess. And that's where Suspects comes from. I didn't fool you. You fooled you. You sat there trying to outsmart a movie that knew very, very specifically how it was you watched movies critically and picked them apart. And I led you down the garden path. You fooled yourself.
And you did a very good job of that.
Well,
So Dennis Coleman wants to know, staying on the Tom Cruise line of questioning, do you have to rein him in because he supposedly likes to do his own stunts, and does that make you nervous? And how do you handle that?
Do I have to rein him in? No. On stunt-wise, no. You might think that Tom is a daredevil. He's not. He's very competent, very careful. He understands that if anything goes wrong, the movie ceases to function. He's also not interested in dying. I can tell you he likes making movies and he wants to keep on doing it. So no, reining him in is never the issue. What I've learned to do with Tom is creatively, when we're talking about story, that if I don't get where Tom's going with an idea, if I don't like the idea that Tom is going with, I will I'll express my doubts, and I'll base it on experiences we've had. I won't base it on, I don't like that in movies. I don't like when movies do that, and because that's the peril of all filmmakers that I've watched screw themselves, is they take things out of movies because they didn't like it in some other movie, or they think it's a trope. And the truth of the matter is, when you're thinking that way, you're thinking as much of yourself as you are of the movie. You're thinking of how you'll be perceived and not how the movie will be perceived. And for me, I only care about what works in the story. For Tom will suggest something to me and I won't get it. And I'll simply say, okay, here's a lesson we learned from a previous movie. I'll follow this idea, but I want to make sure that we don't repeat this mistake. And I go with whatever the idea is. And one of two things will happen invariably. We will find something really great in that we both love. Or Tom will turn to me at a certain point and go, this was a terrible idea. This just didn't work. So I'm never fearful of Tom, because of his pride of authorship, sticking something in the movie because he thought of it, goddammit, and it's got to be in the film. It's either going to work or it's going to get it cut out of the movie, which means I have the freedom to try anything. So I had a musical number in Fallout, and Tom was like, what are you doing? And I said, yeah, I don't know. Let's try it. It might work. And if it doesn't work, here's how I cut it out of the movie. With the opera, Tom was very skeptical of the opera. He was skeptical of the bus stop in Jack Reacher. I was very skeptical of Ilsa's shoes on the roof of the opera house. We come up with these ideas, and we'll just be very frank and say, I don't get this, but let's go. Let's try it, because we both know nobody's ever going to be in the editing room insisting that it stay in the movie because of the effort that went into it. Works or it doesn't.
Artem from the Ukraine has a rather odd question, so I thought I would throw it at you. He says, it was rumored last year that you and Tom were planning to demolish a book market in Kiev. Was it true? And what movie were you talking about?
No, I do. I was not. But if you show me a book market that I can demolish, I will show you how to demolish it. I will. Yeah. We did scout Kiev. Kiev, as I understand, is the correct way to pronounce it. Correct.
Sorry, I'm the ugly American.
No. I believe I could be totally wrong. We can ask the man himself, but I think it's now pronounced Kiev. We scouted several places in Ukraine, and there was actually one place we found that was actually quite extraordinary. The trick of going to any country is you find something you really love there. Now you need to find all the other things that justify moving the huge movie to that country. And we already had too many countries in our movie, but I'd love to shoot in Ukraine at some point. And if there's a cool looking book market you want to get rid of, I'll take care of it for you.
Are you still writing spec scripts?
Yes and no. I mean, do I sit down and write? When was the last time I sat down and actually wrote or came up with a spec idea? I collaborate with other writers on things. I like a broken toy. I like it when people come to me with a script that doesn't work, but has some sort of core idea, and I can rebuild it and resuscitate it. But I just don't have the time. I simply don't have the time to sit down and write a story like that from scratch. And in the case of COVID, I would have, but instead I started writing a book, and it was something I'd always aspired to do and never did. And I was writing notes on something and realized about 30 pages in that I think I'm writing a book. And so I've been writing. Just I wake up in the morning and I write a few paragraphs and try not to think about it. It's not something I remain terribly focused on. And over time, I've amassed about 200 pages, which is something I thought I would never ever do in my life.
And it's a novel.
No, actually, it's I think what it's shaping up to be is something of a little bit about what we're talking about. So a little bit about kind of in somewhat in a narrative form, in kind of a almost in terms of I don't want to call it a memoir because I think that sounds ponderous. It's kind of about how I arrived at what I'm able to articulate now. And these are things that I probably wasn't able to articulate even a year ago. And it's in an attempt to I was standing on set with Tom Cruise and Tommy Gormley, our AD, and Jake Myers, our producer. And Tommy has produced almost all of them, or he's been the AD on almost all of the Mission Impossible movies. Jake Myers has produced a lot of Chris Nolan's films. He's produced The Revenant, and he's produced the last two Mission Impossible movies. He produced Jack Reacher. And I was standing there looking at the four of us standing there, and I thought between the four of us, there is 150 years of unique film knowledge. On a lot of these Mission Impossible movies, we create technology and use it in such a way that it can never be used again, simply because the elements will very likely not come together. We end up acquiring a lot of knowledge that we don't actually apply to the next film. And I thought this is incredibly wasteful for all of us to have this acquired knowledge. Wouldn't it be better if somebody actually wrote it down somewhere? So if somebody ever thought it was of any use, and it's not an attempt for me to say, here's how to make movies. I'm very clear right up front. I can't really tell you how to make movies. I can tell you how I make movies, but I don't even really. I didn't have a book of rules when I set out to make movies. Your movie is in you, and all I'm really interested in is helping filmmakers understand that the biggest obstacle to filmmaking is ourselves. We tend to get in our own way. We tend to create our own rules, and then forget that we created them, and we get tunnel vision very, very early on. And so the book is, I think, more than anything else, a cautionary tale of it's a litany of every mistake I've ever made as a filmmaker. So you get to make your own mistakes and not mine.
Wow, I suspect that would be a bestseller around here.
Or the
that's
five
for sure.
people.
Yeah. So can we go back in time a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe to your early days, because a lot of our members are just getting started. Maybe they have no films under their belt, or maybe one, or they've just had a screenplay optioned. And one of our members has just written here that on your Twitter feed, of which many of our members are following, that you have recommended that young filmmakers go out and make movies.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that, and can you address that in the COVID era as well, which is part of that question?
Look, well, if going back to what I was talking about earlier, there are no rules until you write them. COVID is just another rule. COVID is telling you, okay, you can't make movies in a conventional sense. It's creating a limitation for you. That's not going to stop you from making narrative. If you're saying I can't make a movie because of COVID, COVID's not stopping you. You're stopping you, and what you're adhering to is the story you want to tell versus the environment in which you want to tell it. I don't make movies. My movies made me. That's and anytime I try to make a movie, I don't make it. I don't get it made. It's all when I work at creating, when I work at finding an emotion, when I work at doing something and collaborating and creating, I end up making movies. And for all the years in my career that, in your intro left out a 7-year period where I didn't make any films at all. Your intro left out a 12-year period between my first and second film as a director. I could not get arrested, and I was ready to quit the film business. And I did that because I was trying to control the process. I was trying to make a kind of movie, and I was trying to determine what my future was rather than just going to work and creating my future. When COVID struck and when the movie shut down, what Tom said in terms of bringing together all the crew and having these calls every day, he said, we are creating a future for this business. That's the job that we're doing right now. We're not sitting here making Mission Impossible. We're keeping people working and we're giving people a future. And the movie will happen or the movie won't for reasons that have not, it's not, if it doesn't happen, it's not because we weren't ready. That philosophy applies to Mission Impossible, Public Access, The Way of the Gun, every movie I've ever worked on. You produce and you create. You're focused on execution and not on result. What a lot of the people out there are doing right now, listening to my voice, you have a screenplay and you're trying to figure out how to get that screenplay made. That's great. That should not be taking up 100% of your bandwidth. That can be, you've written it, put it aside, get to work on something else, create a little film, create a 30-second film, create a TikTok, whatever it is. Find people to work with, find people to create with, and by creating, you will find who those people are, and you will create a creative catalyst, and that's where the ignition is going to come from. And everybody that I know that made it in the business came from some beginning like that. Yes, some of them had a script that they submitted, and the script got picked up, and the next thing you know, Bob's your uncle, and they're making movies. That happens. It doesn't happen as often as the people who create. Now, if you're a writer and you don't want to do those things, you don't want to direct, and you don't want to produce, and you don't want to edit, do it anyway. Because the truth of the matter is, if you don't understand, people love to say, and this has become kind of a mantra of mine, writers love to say all the time that writing is where the process of filmmaking begins. And they're very proud of that fact. And I hate to break it to you, it's not. It's where the process of filmmaking ends. You will be writing the screenplay all the way until the last day of ADR, and you probably won't be paid to do it. Understanding the process of filmmaking is where writing begins. And the more you know about how movies are made, the more rock solid the writing you are going to be delivering. And more importantly, the more people will want you on their movies doing their work and getting their movies made and helping to realize what it is they want to do. You have to determine early on that being a screenwriter is different than screenwriting. Getting your movie made is different than making movies. And you can do all of those things at the same time. What we tend to do is we tend to choose one path and focus obsessively on that path. And then we find ourselves very frustrated when that path doesn't take us anywhere. Well, that's because you're actually not moving. You're waiting. And you're waiting for somebody to come along and give you that opportunity. It's not to say that can't happen, but get busy living or get busy dying.
I think this is philosophy that a lot of people are not accustomed to hearing, and I think it's very refreshing. And
you don't have to listen to a word of it, and it's not anything. Look, it's not anything that I can tell you. You will go through this process. Filmmaking is a process. Filmmaking is a process of acceptance. Editing is a process of acceptance. Writing is a process of acceptance. You can fight these ideas, or and many of you will. You'll come around to your own way of thinking, and you'll start to realize that we tend to look at the executive is my obstacle, and the director who won't read my screenplay is my obstacle. Well, they're not active obstacles. They're not people who are out to stop you from doing your career. You're the obstacle. I was the biggest obstacle in my career, hands down, because I believed in dogma. I believed in things that I was told, and I believed in I heard some anecdotal story and said, well, why can't my story be that way? Well, that story that I heard was sheer chance. It might even be myth. It might not even be true. The only real success I had is when I I would walk up to people and say, this is what we should be doing. I can help you on your thing. I had gone around for those 7 years with screenplays asking for permission to make movies, or asking someone to make my movie, which is not even asking permission to make a movie. It's asking someone if they would kindly take my dream away from me and make it into their dream. And what I started to do is put all those scripts in a drawer, and I went into a pitch meeting after Valkyrie. I went into a pitch meeting in a studio with some executive who I never saw again. And I sat in his office, and he said, so what do you got for me? And I had been through the process now to the point where I didn't really care about making movies if it meant having to have these meetings, because those meetings are bullshit. Pitch meetings are bullshit. Submitting your scripts to studios is bullshit. And I sat down with this guy, and he said, what do you got for me? And I said, nothing. He said, what are you talking about? And I said, I've got nothing. I don't have anything to sell you. What have you got? How can I help you? I know how to make movies. How can I help you make yours? And he started pitching me his slate of movies. And he pitched me the first movie, and it was a terrible idea. And I went, yeah, no, I'm not interested in that. What else have you got? And mind you, I needed a job. I was not rolling in dough. I was like, I needed work. I was like, no, not that one either. No. And he started sweating and getting really nervous. And I could just, he was really terrible at pitching his own ideas. And he didn't know how to do it. And I suddenly realized I'd been in the wrong chair for 15 years at this point. Why was I ever in that guy's chair? Why was I ever doing that? It's so much easier to go to them and say, what do you got? First of all, they're motivated to make a movie. I don't have to convince them of making a film. They have films they want to make. I may not agree with the ideas that they're interested in making. I may not be totally excited about them, but I can find a way into those movies. And so what happened when I couldn't get arrested all those years, when I couldn't get my own movies made, I started working on other people's movies. I'd heard nightmare stories about Doug Liman. I didn't want to work with Doug Liman based on the myths and legends that I'd heard about Doug. But Tom Cruise called me and he said, hey, there's this script. It's called All You Need Is Kill. And I said, yeah, I read it. It's not a good screenplay. He goes, no, it's really funny. I said, I read the script you did, and it's not funny. And he said, no, but it's going to be funny. This is a very funny situation. And I want you to think of that movie in terms of making it funny. And I said, oh, okay, all right. And those are my marching orders, and that's how we made Edge of Tomorrow. Not because I went and begged to be on that movie, but because I looked at a project that terrified me, that I didn't want to do, a genre I didn't want to be a part of, a director who really scared the shit out of me because his process is completely very, very, very difficult for writers until you figure him out. And I embraced it. I leaned into it and said, my movie can wait. My future can wait. And by the way, I took that job the day I finished color timing Jack Reacher. I had just fought my way back to being a director. I delivered my movie. And at a point when any other filmmaker would say, what's my directing gig now? How do I parlay this into my next directing gig? I turned around and went right back to being a screenwriter for somebody else, because that was where the creativity was. I was not going to go back to handing my script to people and begging for permission to do it. I just won't do it. And, just it's fine to make that a part of your day. It's fine to dedicate an hour of your day to pushing your dream. And it's important that you do that. But most importantly, just check yourself when you find yourself, am I asking permission? As opposed to, pushing my movie and selling my value. And what am I doing to create value in myself so that other people want me working on their movies? I never set out to make Mission Impossible. I never set out to make 2 of them, let alone 4 of them. But by the time we got to the 3rd and 4th Mission Impossible, I was in a position to say to the studio, yeah, I'll make these movies, but I have to start scouting tomorrow, and I don't know when you're going to see a screenplay. And the studio said, Okay. On Fallout, I was standing in a desert waiting for the right 3 minutes of sunlight and thinking about how David Lean, when he was making Lawrence of Arabia, used to go out to the desert and he had the luxury of standing around and waiting till the light changed so that he could shoot Lawrence of Arabia. I never set out to do those things. Had I set out to do them, I never would have gotten there. And when Tom Cruise comes to me with an idea now, any idea that he's passionate about, and says, I want this in Mission Impossible, I say, great, write it on a Post-it note, stick it on my bulletin board, and go away. Because that will find its way into the movie. And the harder we try to put it in the movie, the more likely it will never, ever, ever work. But every idea that we just think of and let go, it all finds its way into the process because it's who we are. It's part of it's part of our subconscious that is percolating and trying to get out. Your movie is in you. Your movie is working to get out. And when you're forcing that, that's what you're feeling. The obstacle that you're feeling is you trying to make your movie happen instead of letting your movie happen. You're trying to make yourself a filmmaker instead of letting your film make you a filmmaker.
So there's a lot of self-actualization here that I wonder if I want to know about that desert that you spoke about, that 7 years, and what was all that about, and how did that help to sort of shape this whole philosophy of yours?
It was a couple of things. I made The Way of the Gun, and I made The Way of the Gun believing that believing in bullshit. I believed that if you made a film, that film would parlay. You became a director, that would parlay you into other directing jobs. And I was determined to make a film my way and break a lot of molds. And lo and behold, I did that. I also made a movie that nobody came to see, that critics hated, and that took 20 years to find its audience. Now you can do that, but do that on purpose. Don't do that when you're doing something else. And what I define success as now versus then, and this is very important. This is, if we're going to talk about success, let's all talk about a workable definition of what success is. Is it box office success is not in our control. Critical success is not in our control. Awards are not in our control. What's in our control is honoring our commitments. That to me is the definition of success. That's not to say I am successful. That's my objective. That's what I look at as a definition of success. So I make a commitment to my audience to tell a kind of story. When I do that, I immediately determine the size of my film. By determining the size of my audience, I determine what size my movie can be. You can't make The Usual Suspects for $140 million any more than you can make Mission Impossible for $5 million. You think first in terms of who your audience is, and you make your movie appropriately for that audience. And it could be an audience of one. I'm not sitting here telling you to be a big, a mass market filmmaker. I'm not telling you to make Tom Cruise movies. You want to make David Lynch movies, make them. Don't try to make your David Lynch movie for $240 million out of the gate. Just think about who's really going to show up to a David Lynch movie. And you work and you make your movies proportionate to that. I didn't do that with The Way of the Gun. What I did with The Way of the Gun is I had an objective that was completely disaligned with what I was doing while I was doing it. I wanted to get to a place where I could make big historical epics. And I didn't start out by trying to make a movie that made people confident enough in me that they would give me more money. I actually made a movie that was antagonistic, not only to the studio, but to the audience. And then I was surprised when I got exactly the reaction that the movie was designed to do. That put me in the desert for 7 years, along with a lot of other choices that I made where I was deliberately antagonistic, headstrong, prideful, responding emotionally to all kinds of horrible, insulting behavior that you're going to suffer as writers and as young filmmakers. And I took a lot of things personally, had a big chip on my shoulder, and there was absolutely no value in me except the fact that I had written The Usual Suspects. It's the only thing that kept me in the game. And through that time, I kept writing screenplays, believing another myth. I was believing that if you write a screenplay, I was told by my agent at the time, because if you write a good screenplay, you'll be delivered. Well, those screenplays never got made. And Ramesh has read one of them. It's sitting in a drawer and it's unmade. And it doesn't matter that it's good. It's not commercial. It's not commercial in proportion to its cost. If it was a little $3 million movie about the same subject, I could probably get it made, but it's not. It's a $90 million movie about that subject. So it's not a good plan. It's a great dream, and I'll never give up that dream. And I will keep trying to get it made. And I'll keep making Mission Impossibles until somebody says, what do you want to do? But I'm here to tell you, I made Fallout. Fallout made a lot of money. It made the most money of any of the Mission Impossible movies. It was the most successful movie of Tom Cruise's career, dollar for dollar. They still don't come to me and say, what do you want to do? They come to me and say, we'd like you to do something for us, and we'll pay you a little bit more money to do it. That's because I'm on a trajectory that didn't start with wisdom. It started from a place of antagonism, and it started from a place of, I've heard many myths and I'm going to be one of those stories. Well, you can get where I am by doing that. It's just going to take you as long as it took me to get here. Don't be surprised when you're 7 years in the desert like I was. So in that time, I was rewriting studio movies that never got made. And I was using the money that I was being paid to do that to finance the writing of screenplays that no one has ever made and likely will ever make, except one. And that script was Valkyrie. And in that 7 years, I was shopping that script all over town. Nobody would read it, let alone show any interest in making it. And it wasn't until Bryan Singer came to me, having read the script, and he and I had many ups and downs, many falling outs, and we were in the middle of one of those, and I hadn't heard from him in a couple of years, and he found the script, and he called me up and said, I want to make a movie that doesn't have the pressure of a big opening weekend. I don't want to make another Superman. I want to make a movie that is supposed to fail, and this is a perfect movie for that. And that was the ambition going into Valkyrie. There were no illusions about this was going to be a giant moneymaker movie. This was going to be a movie that people took at face value as it's not a commercial film. And it didn't become a commercial film until Tom Cruise got involved. And the whole reason Tom Cruise got involved is because I was in a restaurant, I was listening to people at the next table talking about Tom Cruise, who had just left Paramount Pictures, and they were talking about Tom like his career was over. And I thought, I think this guy's got a couple more movies in him. And I did something that I'd never done in my entire career. I called my manager and I said, is there any way you can get me a meeting with Tom Cruise? I'd never asked for a general meeting in my career. And he got me a meeting at Tom's company. And I had to go through several layers of meetings with Don Granger, who was then an executive of the company. That turned into a meeting with Paula Wagner. And that turned into a meeting with Tom. And that conversation ultimately turned into Valkyrie. If I'd had that conversation even a year before, I wouldn't have been ready. By the time I had the conversation with Tom, I was ready to quit the movie business. I was ready to let everything go. And I wasn't trying to make a movie happen the way I wanted it to happen. What I was trying to do was unload my screenplay so that I could pay off my debts and get out of the movie business. And in doing everything I could to get out of the movie business, I got sucked in. And I took a producing credit on that movie. I took a producing credit on that movie only so that I would be paid more money. I didn't know how to produce a film. I just figured I put the movie together, I deserve a producing credit. Well, Paula Wagner sat me down and she said, I understand you're a producer on the film. And of course, my answer was, well, yes, in name only. But a little voice in my head said, how you answer this question will determine the rest of your life. Choose carefully. And instead of saying, no, well, yes, I'm a producer, but I'm going to cash a check and get out of here. I decided to say, I am now. And she said, good, because I've been working with Tom Cruise for 25 years. I've been on set with him every day for every movie in those 25 years. And now that I'm running United Artists, I can't be there, and I need somebody to be Tom's on-set guy, and I want that to be you. And every day I went to work waiting for Tom Cruise to figure out that I didn't know what I was doing. And I went to work every day expecting to be fired. And all I did was deliver on everything I said I would deliver on day by day by day, until one day they gave me a job I couldn't do. And when that day came, I was going to be fired. Every day my wife and I went to bed after having a wonderful day. Now suddenly I'm in Germany and I'm making a World War II movie. I'm making it, I had to let somebody else direct it. Somebody I didn't want to let direct it. But now suddenly there I was making this movie, and I was learning more about film from a guy who'd worked with every living filmmaker that you could ever possibly want to work with. And my head would hit the pillow, and I would look at my wife and say, this all ends tomorrow. Tomorrow they're going to figure out I don't know what I'm doing, and we're going home. This is a business. This is not a friendship, and they owe us nothing. And I have kept that attitude to this day. I don't go to work thinking I've been working with Tom Cruise for 12, 13 years and I'm entitled to my position on the movie. I go to work every day saying, if I'm not the right guy to make this movie, they should fire me. They should send me home. The day I can't do this, I'm a liability and I'm in the way. And I'm leaving. And that has kept me moving forward every single day since then. Because I'm not trying to hit a target. I'm not working towards a specific movie or a start date or anything else like that. I'm working towards production, creating. And I'm not worried about what am I getting from it? When am I getting it? What is my credit? All those things come. Those things come and they come in their own way. And the harder you try to make those things happen, the more people want to stop you from getting it. And the more you produce, and the harder you try to get out of the room, the more people throw enticements at you to stay.
What is it about this that you love? What is it about filmmaking that you love?
Without question, with writing, which I think is infinitely harder than directing. Writing is a lot harder. With writing, it's the moment of ignition. There's a part of the writing process where you're doing everything you can to get the story started, and you can't do it. You don't want to do it. You want to walk away from it, and something clicks, and suddenly the story is telling itself. The story is in the back of your head, and it won't let you go. I'm not having to think about the movie. The movie won't let me stop thinking about it. That to me is the greatest part of writing. It's the most exciting part of writing. With directing, it is that creativity that comes from finding the emotion within a set of inert tools, a screenplay, a lens, a light, a location, an actor, and everything has become for me, going all the way back to Usual Suspects and Way of the Gun. If you watch Way of the Gun, The Way of the Gun is a film that is doing everything it can to provide information to the audience and asking the audience to turn that information into emotion. It's asking the actors to turn that information into emotion. What I've learned is it is the director's job to create the emotional environment so that the script doesn't need to be emotional. The actors don't need to emote. That the composer doesn't need to do that. All of those things become accents to what was already there when you selected the right lens, the right location, the right light, and created an emotional feeling. Finding those emotions, and the fact that you can when you guys see Top Gun, I can't wait for the world to see this movie. When you see what all of those things converging, when they really harmonize and really work, creating an emotional experience. That to me is I have, since the time I was a little child, told stories. And I told stories for no other reason than to move the person I was telling it to. I am not an auteur. I am not a visionary. I don't care if you know that I directed my movies. I don't care if you ever know my name. I care that I move you. And I care that I move you not just now, but 100 years from now, long after I'm gone. It's the only thing that interests me, is moving, engaging, and moving an audience, and ideally the biggest audience possible.
You said earlier that you had considered walking away. If you had actually put your career behind you, what would you be doing now?
I'd inevitably have ended up writing. I would have ended up writing books. I can't not tell stories. I can't, or I would have become. I would have become a film teacher. I would have parlayed my award for Suspects into a teaching job somewhere. And frankly, you know, as you have noticed from my hour-long answers to questions, my filmmaking curriculum would have been a bunch of poor kids having to listen to me tell stories all day. I would have found a way to tell stories to make a living. I was just very fortunate in that I met someone who cared as much about stories as I did at what would have been the end of my career.
And that's Tom Cruise.
That's Tom. Yes.
And so, in the beginning of your career, so how did you fall into screenwriting?
You know, by accident. I never set out to be a screenwriter. I was in sixth grade. I remember very distinctly. I was 12 years old. I was sitting at my desk. I was writing a short story. I have no memory of ever having written a short story before that. I don't know what the story was that I was writing when I was writing it, but I know that my teacher, we had a substitute teacher that day. It wasn't our teacher. It was a substitute teacher named Mrs. Huber. And Mrs. Huber saw what I was doing and said, "What are you writing?" And I said, "I'm writing a story." And she said, "Is that what you want to do when you grow up?" And it had never occurred to me that that was even an option, that writing was just something I did. It was not something I thought of doing as a career. And I was immediately struck with the realization that, yes, that was what I wanted to do. And I told her so. And from that minute on, I knew what I wanted to do with my life. I knew that I wanted to be a writer. This was a blessing and a curse. It gave me a great deal of security and certainty that not only was it something I knew what I wanted to do, but I also knew I could do it. I didn't need to run faster than people to do it. I didn't need to be able to lift great weights. I didn't have to have great aim. I didn't have to have any kind of special physical skills. All I needed was my brain and my hand and a pencil. At the same time, I knew from that moment on that school didn't have a fucking thing to teach me. That I knew how to read, write, add, subtract, and multiply, and I didn't need anything else that school had for me. And I knew from third grade, because I hated school, I knew from third grade that you didn't have to go to college, that college was optional. And as soon as I discovered it was optional, that was like having 4 years taken off my prison sentence. And I said, I'm never going to college. I'm just never going to do it. So I was granted a certain amount of certainty at a very young age, with absolutely no guarantees and nothing to back it up, that I was ever going to make a living doing that. But my sixth grade teacher, Mrs. Huber, was the substitute. The actual teacher was a woman named Ms. Denlinger. Her name is now Ms. Hensley. She recognized that there was something there. And I was a weird kid. I was being picked on by other kids one day in class. Every kid in the class was picking on me. And she said, "You all need to pay attention to Chris. You need to be nicer to him. He's going to be on television one day." And I was so stunned when she said that. The fact that somebody saw in me some ability that I wished for but did not know that I had. And when I won my Academy Award, she was the first person I thanked. And I've never forgotten, and I'm still in touch with her. I was just emailing with her yesterday. And so I was off as a writer, and I wanted to write books. I loved writing short stories. I loved Roald Dahl and Stephen King and Ray Bradbury. I wanted to write stories like that. And I went to grade school with Brian. and Ethan Hawke, and James
Really?
Murphy
Wow.
from the LCD Sound System. All of us went to school together. Brandon Boyce was another one who was there. We had kind of a filmmaking, storytelling, creative. I don't even want to call us a collective because that sounds too organized. We just believed in each other. It just was a thing that was accessible to us, that other people. No one ever told us we couldn't have it. Nobody ever said, "You're out of your fucking mind. You can't be a filmmaker. It takes something to do that." My parents, who desperately wanted me to get some kind of decent grades and get a college education, my father was a teacher. My parents, as much as they understood that what I was wishing for was 1 in a trillion chance that I would make it, they never discouraged me. They never said I couldn't. And while they desperately did everything they could to get me to focus on school, they also never ever said, you can't do that, and you need to find some other line of work in case that doesn't work out. It was never introduced to me as a concept, so I just knew. I knew. It wasn't until years later. I mean, Brian and I knew each other in school. I had been in a Bryan Singer short film. Ethan had been in a Bryan Singer short film. We ran we didn't really run in the same circle until really my senior year in high school, after he had graduated. He was 2 years ahead of me. And he came to me to develop his first couple of screenplays because he remembered the short stories that I had written in school. He remembered the acting that I did in school. I was always in school theater because there were lots of girls and there was no homework. And that's that. And so ultimately, I graduated high school. I went to Australia for a year, worked at a boarding school, which essentially meant I worked about 11 hours a week and drank a lot of beer. And when I came back, I went to work for a detective agency in New Jersey, belonged to my uncle. And I got very interested in law enforcement. And throughout that, I was reconnecting with Brian. We wrote a screenplay over the phone together. And I applied to the New York Police Department with a friend of mine who I'd grown up with. And I had been accepted into the academy and was about to go. And Brian called me. He had made a short film with Ethan, and Ethan had then suddenly been in Dead Poets Society, and the short film got a lot of attention. And Brian called and said, "I have an opportunity to make a feature film for $250,000, and would you write the screenplay?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "Great, I need it in 2 weeks." So I learned how to type by writing. That was the first time I actually ever typed a screenplay. It was only the second screenplay I wrote. I put it in the mail, shipped it to California, got in a car, and drove to California after it. And 3 months after I arrived in Los Angeles, we were in pre-production on our first feature film, and that's how I got into screenwriting.
So it's safe to say
screenwriting by trying to be a cop. That's you'll notice there's a theme running throughout this. It's by not trying. It was just kind of like, I have this aspiration. I'm going to follow other interests and keep my hand in it at all times.
As a former New Yorker, I have a lot of friends and family who are cops. So, but none of them screenwriters.
That
there are a lot of that I know of. Yeah. So there is a common sort of edict that you often hear that you must have at least 10 screenplays under your belt before you can be a screenwriter. But that doesn't seem to be true.
Here's how you become a screenwriter. Okay. Get yourself a pencil and a piece of paper. You don't need a computer. You don't need Final Draft. And write interior, and then choose any location you want, and then decide whether it's night or day. You're a screenwriter. There's no such thing as an aspiring screenwriter or an aspiring filmmaker. You're either creating or you're not creating. And anybody who tells you that there is some magical barrier and that there is some... I haven't made it. I'm making 2 Mission Impossible movies and I'm producing Top Gun. I haven't made it. I'm making it. I'm in the process of of getting where I still dream of being. And you will be too. Everybody thinks there is a destination. There's not. There's a journey, and you start the journey. I hate to say it, the beginning of that journey is steeped in failure. If you think that you're a failure as a writer because you're failing, you're doing it wrong. The whole idea is you're supposed to be failing. You're supposed to be learning from your mistakes. You're supposed to be going through a process of trial and error and trial by fire. The strongest steel goes through the hottest fire. And everybody is so consumed with getting to a place of success. And as we talked about earlier, you don't even understand the definition of success as you define it. If you think money is success, let me tell you, money can turn into failure faster than anything. If you think a hit movie is a success, I had a really good experience. I had as good an experience you can on my second feature film, my first sole writing credit, and won an Academy Award. It didn't solve any problems for me. It created a lot more problems than it solved. And the night I won that award was not a happy evening. And Brian and I weren't speaking to each other, and I was in a miserable relationship, and more importantly, I didn't know what my next job was. That's not the case when I came up with The Usual Suspects. I was working in a copy room in a law firm in downtown Los Angeles. I was making a couple of bucks an hour. I was broke. I was miserable, but I had an idea that I knew was a great idea. I had to compare the two experiences. The experience of winning an Academy Award for The Usual Suspects or coming up with the idea. I'll trade coming up with the idea every time. That's where you are now, and it doesn't look like that because you're in it. You're not looking back on it. And just keep going. Just keep doing what you're doing. Not everybody's going to make it. Not everybody has the many, many, many components that come together. Not everybody learns. And that's really the thing. It's not about whether or not you have talent. It's whether or not you learn. And I'm here to tell you, I work with some very, very highly successful people in the business. They don't learn either. They don't learn no matter how many times you teach them. So that's what this process is. It is a process of learning. It's a process of growing, and it's a process wherein you cannot grow without failure, and you need to learn to accept failure like everything else.
Wow. The comments here, I think people are really blown away. I don't know if you're looking at those. If you're looking at those
I'm seeing
comments.
them. So.
Yeah, people are really blown away by this, because this is a philosophy, and I'm learning more about attitude and the importance of that, more so than almost anything else. I mean, that really seems to be what it is that you're saying here.
Yes, we choose words. I mean, you look at everything that's going on in the world right now. We choose words without agreeing upon what the definition of those words really is. And so you and I can be arguing about something without ever having sat down to talk about what the definition of that word is. And so what are we even arguing about? So if you and I sat down and had an argument about success and failure for an hour without either of us ever saying, well, what is success? What is failure? And the fact that success and failure are interchangeable. One can very quickly turn into the other without your having even realized it. When Tom Cruise broke his ankle on Fallout, I knew that was actually a hugely beneficial thing. When Mission Impossible shut down in Venice, 2 days before we started shooting and they evacuated the city, I was relieved. I knew that was a beneficial thing. Yes, there were a lot of really catastrophic things that happened as a result of it. They were all things beyond my control. Suddenly, things that were not in my control were in my control again. And I could affect change. I could save jobs. I could do things and keep people working and fix other projects that needed fixing. without and as opposed to sitting there saying, but now my life is on hold. My dream of what I'm going to do after Mission Impossible is going to happen 2 years later than that. I'm not in control of those things. I'm only in control of the things that I'm in control of that are right in front of me. And when you start to look at success and failure as interchangeable ideas, you relax into life a lot more. It's if you need that fear, if you need the fear of failure to drive you, go for it. That's great. I get plenty of that anyway. I don't need to go looking for it. I get the fear of failure I get is when I don't have a screenplay and I'm on my way to work and I know I don't have the pages today. And if I don't come up with something right now, the whole movie stops and I'm going to lose my job. That's where my fear of failure comes in. I don't worry about anymore, how will I be regarded as a director? What kind of films will they let me make? What awards will I win? What are the critics going to think, et cetera, et cetera? All those things, none of those matter because in 10 years they'll change anyway. Tell me what won the Academy Award 2 years ago. Tell me what won the Academy Award 5 years ago for Best Picture. Tell me what movie is your favorite movie.
Right.
Tell me your top 3 favorite movies. Tell me the movie that makes you cry every time you watch it. And tell me if those movies are really the same. That's the world I'm interested in.
So we have some general questions here.
Sure.
I'm trying to avoid some of the fanboy questions, but so
Just
here's,
as valid.
yeah, I guess so. Here's a question from MG, which he's asking: Is there more or less or a similar level of pressure working on a big franchise with a huge star where the audience is already in place versus working on an original film where the story has to find and build its own audience?
There is no difference in the amount of pressure on a $5 million movie like The Usual Suspects or a $180 million movie like Mission Impossible. The pressure comes from different places. The pressure has different demands, but for all of the luxuries that a huge budget like Mission affords you, it also has gigantic responsibilities. For all of the luxuries that you don't have on a movie like The Usual Suspects, and how difficult that makes every day, and how you have to shoot for 24 hours a day just to finish your film. The burden at the box office is slightly different. There's no one can claim that their movie was the most difficult movie ever made. No one can say that the making of my movie was more difficult than the making of somebody else's. You can say, I didn't give a shit, and I chose not to try, and I didn't let the pressure bother me, but the consequences are very much the same. Way the Gun cost $8.5 million, and it demolished my career. It demolished my career for years, and took me a long time to build back up. And if somebody handed me that again tomorrow and said, make a feature film for that amount of money, those are muscles I have not exercised in 20 years. I'd be terrified. I would be terrified. I would be much more frightened of that than strapping Tom Cruise to the side of an airplane, especially because I'm inside the plane. I'm not outside.
Do you regret making The Way of the Gun, or do you feel like it was part of your journey?
It's part of my journey, and and again, for years I saw it as a bone-crushing failure. I now look at that film as that film is a success. It's a success by that definition. The people I made the movie for discovered it. They just didn't discover it on opening weekend. If I had set out to make that movie with no objective as to what that movie was going to get me down the road, if I just made that movie to make it, for whomever it was intended for, that film would have been a success by our definition. That film was only a failure because I expected things of it that I actually didn't work to achieve. It's absolutely no different than just throwing a dart at a map. I was making a movie and hoping it would be a hit so that I could parlay it into another hit. Well, there's actually a way to go about making movies in such a way that they are. You can't guarantee a hit, but you can. Roger Corman guaranteed that you can make movies without losing money. You just have to be realistic with yourself about what your ambitions are, what your budget is, who your audience is, and work frugally in those terms. We're taught a bunch of bullshit by the culture, by what success is, by what a successful filmmaker is, by what an auteur is and a visionary is, and with so much hype is heaped on top of directors and writers and actors, and everybody thinks that that's the goal, and that's not the goal. That's a byproduct. It's a byproduct of production, and success is a byproduct of production. Happiness is a byproduct of production. You're instead of pursuing those things, just produce, and some of those things will come. I'm not guaranteeing all of them, but some of them will. And more importantly, you'll be producing.
Rick Colessa wants to know about your experience working on the script for Rogue One. Was it like what was it like stepping into the world of Star Wars? Did you have an interest in writing for Star Wars?
Who ever said that I worked on Rogue One?
Rick Colessa.
Rick Colessa. I would tell you. I will tell you all about movies upon which I am a credited writer. The only movies I talk about, whether or not I have worked on them, the only movies I confirm that I've worked on, in terms of a rewrite, is a movie like Ghost Protocol, where Tom Cruise went and told everybody that I had worked on it. As a matter of policy, I don't ever talk about the movies I may or may not have worked on, met on, read, and given a comment on. So
I think that's a fair answer. So let's move on.
That's as honest I can be without saying no.
Someone here asked, what advice do you have for new writers writing action?
Yes, very good question. Most importantly, clarity, geography, and story. Those are your big three banners you put at the top. I'm not interested in spectacle. I'm not interested in, I'm going to come up with a big trailer idea or anything like that. Those things tend to take care of themselves when you come up with a basic concept for an action sequence and tell the story well. Action sequences are stories in and of themselves. They are character journeys. By the way, another word that we talk about and don't define, story. So what is story in a way that we can work with it, in a way that everybody understands what we're talking about? Because when I say plot, you guys might think one thing and I think another. When we say tone, you may think one thing, I think another. When we talk about story is an emotional journey. That's all it is. You're taking the audience on an emotional journey. If you want to really break it down to something, a version of story, and I'm not saying mine's right or wrong, it's what I work with. Story is a series of emotional impulses designed to separate the audience from their conscious reality. What I'm trying to do, it's not through scenes, lines, notes, words. It's through impulses, instantaneous, impulse by impulse, shot by shot, frame by frame. I'm trying to involve you in my reality and separate you from yours. And I do that through engagement. And by keeping you engaged, by keeping you engrossed, and by keeping you listening to what's happening in my story and wondering what's happening next in my story, you're not thinking about yours. So that's what I talk about when I talk about story, and that's what I talk about when I talk about an action scene. Is I'm not sitting there describing this amazing shot that's this incredible thing that's going to look great in a trailer. I'm telling a story the same way I'm writing my screenplay, the same way I'm telling a joke at a dinner table. And if you can tell a joke, you can write a screenplay. Screenwriters hate it when I say that, but that's true. I mean, screenwriting is just a very sophisticated form of setup and payoff and telling a joke. It's the same kind of storytelling.
Julian Roberts has a question. He wants to know, how is the World War II bomber movie coming along? Will we get to see that in the near future? Can you tell us more about it?
That's The
Ramesh
Last
can tell
Mission.
you all about that. He just read
Yes.
it. That movie is called The Last Mission. I still control the rights to the book. I still have the screenplay. Very recently, a producer called me and asked me to read it, and I said, he said, "Can I show it to a production company?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Why not?" And following in my philosophy, I said, "Because here's what happens when you do that. The production company will read the script. They will take 3 weeks to call and pass on the script, and they'll pass for a reason like, well, we're already working on a World War II movie, or, well, we don't want to make a World War II movie." And those were things that were evident before they ever read the screenplay. When somebody wants to make a screenplay about World War II B-29 bombers in the Pacific, I've got the script. So you go find the people that want to make that movie, and then I'll come in and solve their problem. But I'm never going to send a script to them and give them the freedom to read my script and to get a look at what they were never going to buy. And that has become my philosophy. And of course, what that does is it creates an appetite for the thing that you will not show them. I did an interview with Empire Magazine for Jack Reacher, a movie that came out in 2012, and we did a spoiler special on Jack Reacher. And in it, I talked about a project that Cruz and I are talking about doing post Mission Impossible, which is a much grittier, R-rated. It's a return to something a lot more, a lot edgier for Tom, and that Tom has completely embraced. I didn't say what the movie was, but while I was in this interview, I talked about it. And a company that had that had caused me a great deal of trouble on another project I don't need to go into, they called immediately and said, "Hey, is this thing real? Is it real? Because we're really interested." They didn't even need to know what it was. They just knew that Tom Cruise was attached to this movie. It was a smaller movie. It was rated R. And, and they said, "Well, when we're ready, we'll call you." That's the, it's not to say that we are all in that position. It's not to say that we have the luxury of doing that, but it is a way of looking at the people that you're handing your script to and asking yourself, what are they really doing? It's very rare that people are looking for raw material to turn into a movie. What they're looking for is to attach themselves to movies that other people are making. And that's why I'm talking to you about, yes, keep writing your screenplay, keep trying to sell your screenplay. But remember that when people are reading your screenplay, they're reading your writing. What you're really selling is not the screenplay, it's selling you. It's selling your skills as a writer. It's telling them that you have skills that they need, because they are always looking for writers that they can rip off and get those writers to write their other movies for them. Instead of looking at that as something to be exploited, you're looking at that as an opportunity to exploit. That's your way in. And the only way you hurt yourself in those things is when you make deals you can't get out of, or you get emotionally attached to the work that you're doing, instead of getting emotionally attached to how well you're doing the work. That's what you need to focus on.
P. Woodruff is asking, lenses and cameras. Any advice on lenses and cameras for us newbies who are making stuff no one will see?
You've asked the $1 million question, my friend. You have asked the most important question in terms of aspiring directors out there. All of you strike the word aspiring from your title. Here it is. Okay. So I didn't understand lenses on my first film, and I never had one discussion about lenses on the film. I do not know a single shot in my first film what lens it was shot on. I can guess it now because I've developed an eye for what lenses are. Once you have determined who the audience is, the next most important conversation to have is about what is the lens. So on my first film, I never discussed the lens once. On Mission Impossible Fallout, I had 3,000 setups in that movie. I had more setups than 2 Harry Potter movies combined. There was not one setup on that movie where the first conversation we didn't have was the lens. We talked about the lens every single time. And what you need to think of when you think of lenses, you can look up focal length, you can look up the rule of thirds, you can look up lighting, and you can read all that stuff. And all those books, they're so tedious and so boring, and I don't understand them. And they're really, really hard. Here's what you need to do. When you look at a lens, look at the number of the focal length on the lens. There's an 18 millimeter lens all the way up to, say, 150 millimeter lens. The number on the lens signifies the amount of intimacy that lens provides. And the more intimacy you want to put into the scene, or a line, or a moment, the higher that number goes. And the more you want to stand back from the action, the lower the number goes. That's completely and utterly the most basic, rudimentary, almost, people will think it's the most childish thing I have ever said. For somebody who doesn't understand anything about lenses, understanding that principle when I was 20 years old would have gotten me where I am a lot faster. The other thing that I want you to do is I want all of you to go out and I want you to take photographs after we finish this. I want you to do it with your phone, with just everybody's got a phone in their pocket. And what I want you to do when you're taking the photograph is I want you to think about 3 things and only 3 things: lens, light, and location. And when you take a photograph and you look at it and go, why don't I like this photograph? It is because one of 3 things, or all 3 of those things, are not in sync. And remember that you can alter, almost always alter, one of those 3 things. You can either change the light, you can change the location, or you can change the lens. On most iPhones now, you can sort of pretend to change a lens. What we don't understand when we're first starting out, and what most people, they don't tell us, they don't make us aware of those things. They don't make us aware of light. And so what happens is we look at the picture and we can't understand why, when we're taking the picture, it doesn't look like what our eye sees. An example I will give you: you're driving down the highway and you see the moon coming up over the horizon. It's a big red moon. It's like bigger than you've ever seen it. And it looks like you could drive there in 10 minutes. And you think, oh my God, that's amazing. And you take out your phone and you go to take a picture of the moon, and it looks like a little tiny raisin. And so you blow it up, or maybe you swing to the 2-power lens on your phone, and now it looks like maybe a bigger raisin. And everything you do to try to make the moon look as dramatic as it looked to you doesn't work. And that's because this lens and this lens are completely different. This lens is connected to your brain, and it's connected to your heart, and this lens is designed to filter out things you don't want to see and let you focus on the things that you do. And it's also a lot more flexible and a lot more variable. The lens on your phone is very ungiving. And so what you want to do is stop looking at the world through your eyes and start looking at the world through the lens. If you don't tell the lens what you want to see exactly, the lens will show you what it sees approximately. And so you need to start to learn how to see the world through the lens's eye, instead of assuming that the lens sees what you see. And that's where I talk about awareness, and that's where I talk about giving into it and letting the movie tell you what it's going to be. And the first thing you need to do, the first lesson in photography, is just an awareness of those three things: lens, light, and location. What happens when I get on the floor? What happens when I stand up over top of it? What happens when I move the light behind it? What happens when I move the object in front of a window and stand with the object between me and the window? And so what I've just told you with lens, light, and location took me 25 years to articulate. You're way ahead of the game. Take your phone out right now after this and just go screw around with those ideas. And the other big secret is backlight. Just put light behind what you're shooting at. Go watch Blade Runner, amazing movie. Watch all the shots in Blade Runner that don't have backlight. There isn't one. And just an awareness of backlight in movies that are aesthetic. Just go watch any movie that you think is aesthetically amazing. A movie that you think is really like a gorgeous, sumptuous, incredible movie, and watch it with no sound and just study where the light is. Just look at it for the light, and look at it, most importantly, for the location where the scene was shot. I'm not just talking about where the camera is located in relation to the subject, but the location itself. Watch that. Go watch Inception. Amazing looking movie, incredible cinematography. Yes, it's also got incredible lens choices, incredible light, and incredible locations. And that's what gives those movies that texture. So what I've just told you is something that no cinematographer ever sat me down, and it wasn't a question I didn't know to ask. So whoever asked that question, you all owe that person a drink, because they just asked the single most important question in terms of creating visual storytelling that I could ever answer.
Well, the last thing that P. Woodruff needs is more alcohol. So, but
Buy him
the best answers are always the unexpected ones, and that was very unexpected, actually. Thank you. So we have one question here. It's kind of vague, but I still thought it would be interesting given all of this sort of philosophy that was very unexpected today. This person is asking, is there a deal breaker for you?
Is there a deal breaker, like a thing I won't do?
Perhaps. Yeah, it was a very vague question. But, are there certain things that are put upon you or put in front of you that you're just like, nah, something, this is just a project that I want to do. Maybe not just concept, but maybe just sort of, other accoutrements that are attached to it.
Yeah, I mean, all the time. There are just, there are projects that you look at and say life is too short. There are other projects. I have a very good friend who says life is too long. It's just, you're gonna be on that movie for a long, long time, and you're not going to be happy while you're doing it. Most importantly, it's really for me about who are my collaborators and what can I bring to the project. If they're waving a lot of money at you, you take it because this is the one, because your ships come in and this is like the payday, you're going to be miserable. You're going to be really, really, really miserable. You're going to be finding yourself suddenly realizing I've done this for all the wrong reasons. And every filmmaker I've talked to, when they're at their most unhappy is when they did it for reasons other than it was a story that they wanted to tell. Because at least then, if the movie doesn't work, you did your best and you followed your heart. If you take the money just for the money, and the movie doesn't work, it wasn't worth all the money in the world. And if you take the money and the movie does work, that's the work you're going to be getting. That's where they're going to be investing in you. That's the thing that they're going to want you to come back and do again and again and again. So it's not to say don't do it. It's not to say you might run into a situation where financially you have to do it. Just know what it is you're getting into when you do it. Just be honest with yourself.
Look at the way you spun that question into a really good answer. See?
It was a good question.
I wasn't so sure. I wasn't so sure about that question, but I figured that you would have some sort of surprise for me. So as we wrap this up, are there questions that you wish that we had asked you? Are there things that people don't ask you that you feel we should be asking you?
I would have brought up the lenses if nobody had brought it up. That was a very, very, very good question. Yeah. Oh, so the only other thing I'll talk about, we touched on it early on. You know, when we were talking about dialogue, my suspicion of dialogue. Another thing is music, and the way that I deal with music in film. How I work with a composer, how I approach film and that philosophy. Especially, I'm talking about this because right now we're in the process of mixing a movie, and a lot of what we're doing is mixing the music. What I've learned to do, probably really only in the last couple films, is to regard music and dialogue as very much one and the same. Dialogue is just as musical as music is a language, and by thinking of dialogue in musical terms, thinking of dialogue in terms of something that conveys an emotion rather than information, it has changed the way that I write scenes. When I find myself writing something that is purely informational, if I can't inject it with something like conflict, humor, tension, suspense, drama, especially conflict, then I know that what I'm doing is I'm writing information, and information is the death of emotion. It was the biggest lesson I learned between Rogue Nation and Fallout, was how to articulate that. Somebody asked me about writing exposition and what was the secret to writing exposition, and without thinking, I said that information is the death of emotion. Thinking about your dialogue as a delivery device for emotion. That's not to say it's a character expressing emotions. There's nothing less emotional than watching a character experience an emotion. What you want is the audience is experiencing an emotion through that character, and that really changed the way that I wrote dialogue, the way that I wrote exposition. It also changed the way I frame shots. It's the other thing I want you thinking of when you go out with your phone after this and you're playing with lens, light, and location. Just be asking yourself, is the frame that I'm setting, is this pure information or is this emotion? You could take a picture of anything and it's just a thing. If you look through all the photos in your phone right now, unless you're somebody who's really enthusiastic about photography, most of us take pictures, and I'm just as guilty of it as anybody. We take pictures that are not actually photographs. They're bookmarks. They're things that are meant to remind us of things that were important to us. Your dog, or something you care about. A lot of you, it's yourself. We all take pictures of ourselves on our phones now. Very few of us actually stop to consider what the emotional effect of the photograph that we're taking would have on others. And so when you're writing dialogue, when you're thinking about music, when you're thinking about framing a shot, I want you to think about how it feels, not what it means, but what it feels. And remember, the most important thing is what you mean doesn't matter in the least. The only thing that matters is what your audience feels. And the sooner you start to connect empathetically and emotionally to your audience, the sooner you'll be communicating with them. The same way that you'll be communicating with the camera, and the same way that you'll be communicating with the page. And I think that's everything I could possibly impart.
Well, I have one other quick question, if you don't mind.
Of course.
Someone asked, because this pops up a lot in discussion, how do you process notes during development, script notes? Notes you get.
Notes. Here is the thing. I'll tell you a story. I got into a debate on social media because I said there's no such thing as a bad note. That there are only There are only bad examples that come with the note. If somebody knew how to write a screenplay, they wouldn't give you bad notes. They'd give you good solutions. The truth of the matter is, every note is the same thing. It's whoever's giving you that note. It's a person who can't write saying, help me to like your movie more. Help me to be more engaged with your story. And of course, when they give you a suggestion, they're not writers, so their suggestions are patently awful most of the time. And that's very frustrating because we listen to that and think, they're making me write this crap that they would do. What I do is I look at the emotion behind the note. I look at what emotion that note is searching for, and I find a way to do it on my terms instead of the terms that they are suggesting in the note. Now, sometimes you're just going to get a note from the head of the studio saying, I want it to be like this, and that's horrible and it's miserable and you got to go through with it. Most of the times, though, when you think of it in terms of take that idea and find a way to make it your own, you come up with creative solutions. So when I said this on social media, this guy said, that's bullshit. I got a really stupid note, and it's undeniably the dumbest note anybody's ever given me. I said, okay, what was your note? He was doing a remake of Walking Tall. And Walking Tall, for those of you who don't know the movie, is the 70s exploitation vigilante movie about a sheriff named Buford Pusser, who very famously had this 2x4 that he would go around beating the shit out of people with. And it was and it was kind of this like visceral, fun, sort of Dirty Harry movie with a guy beating the crap out of people with a 2x4. And it was a little bit of a revenge story. They killed his wife, I think, in the story. There was some violence that he was responding to. And he said he was working on the remake to Walking Tall, and this executive gave him the dumbest note he'd ever received, which is he wanted him to make the 2x4 a character in the story. He wanted to give the 2x4 a personality. And I said, that's an excellent note. And he said, that's the dumbest note imaginable, because in his mind, he saw Bobby the talking 2x4 that was a character in the story that had some voice or spoke to Buford. And I said, Buford and his wife are building a house, or his wife-to-be are building a house. When the villains of the movie come to kill Buford. And in the process, they fail to kill Buford, but they burn his house to the ground, and in so doing, his wife is killed. And Buford ends up in the hospital. And when he gets out of the hospital, the first thing he does is he goes to the wreckage of his burned home that was going to be where he spent the rest of his life with his wife. And he pulls a 2x4 out from one of the unfinished walls with nails sticking out of it. And he spends the rest of the movie beating the shit out of the people with that 2x4. Now, don't you think every time you look at that 2x4, it doesn't have some meaning? And don't you think that 2x4 becomes his sidekick in the movie? And he says, yeah, shit, I got to admit that's actually a really good note. That is how you take notes. That is how you respond to a note. You look at the note and say, I have to take the note. But how do I take the note in a way that makes me proud and that fits into my storytelling philosophy? I don't have to take the note literally. Take it figuratively, take it emotionally, make it character, make it story, never make it plot, and never make it emotion. And you'll do all right.
Yeah, sometimes the worst idea ever turns in to something that's pretty effective, surprisingly.
Tom Cruise wanted to take off Rebecca Ferguson's shoes. I thought that was the dumbest idea I'd ever heard, and I didn't have time to deal with it. And all anybody talked about after that movie came out was, we love the shoes. The shoes were so great. Okay, he knows something. The truth of the matter is he understood that there was what Tom said was, he said, when you're on a date with somebody and you've been out to a formal occasion, and at the end of the night, your date always takes off her shoes and she ends up carrying her shoes and she's going to have to jump off the roof of a building. Do you really think she wants to be wearing high heel shoes when she does it? And it was like, it was character. It was character, and it had a flair and it had an emotion, and it was a connection between those two people in the midst of this big action scene. And the shoes taught me everything. I just learned to go with it, and again, always find a way for me to turn it into the 2x4.
Nice.
Ramesh, are there any other brilliant questions?
There was one that should new writers write for budget? Like, should they keep that in mind, or if they want to write a huge sci-fi pick, or if they want to write a huge action film, should they go ahead and do that?
No, if somebody tells you to write for a budget, sure, and that's going to come soon enough. Write for story and character, and write for your voice. Don't write for spectacle. Don't write for flavor of the moment trends. Whatever trend is happening now, by the time somebody reads your script, it won't be the trend anymore. It'll be old hat. You'll be accused of ripping everybody off. Just write. Just write for your voice and tell a story and character.
How do you define voice?
I wish I could. You're going to find it. Your voice is in you. What I'm talking about is like, you're looking for ways to tell your story the way you want to tell it. You will find your voice. It's in you. Story is in you. For the directors who are out there, your style as a director is in you. You don't need to follow the style of another director. You don't need to avoid the style of another director. You don't need to say, I don't want to do that because this other director is doing it. You can't be like another director, no matter how hard you try. You can be kind of like, you can resemble, but it's always going to have your DNA. The same way that you can't not be like certain directors. Enough people accuse me of ripping off a bunch of other filmmakers who are my contemporaries, and they've never caught me for who I'm really ripping off. Mm-hmm. Because the people I'm stealing from, when I'm stealing from those guys, they're not filmmakers like I am, and my DNA affects what I did, and it's that much different. I'm similar to other filmmakers because I have similar tastes and I have similar ideas, not because I'm trying to ape somebody. Just all you need to focus on is connecting with the ball. The hardest thing you can do, swinging a baseball, swinging a golf club, the hardest thing you can do is connect with the ball. There's so many complicated pieces that go into you swinging a baseball bat or a golf club or a tennis racket and connecting perfectly with the ball. Don't worry about where the ball is going. You focus on execution and not on result, and you'll find your voice.
Nice.
Well, I cannot thank you enough for taking all of this time to speak to our constituents here in the Inside Pitch. I'm going to ask you two to just hang on while I end the broadcast. Let's all, in some silent way, sending out good vibes to Christopher Mcquarrie for taking the time out today. So thank you. Thank everybody for tuning in.
Thank you.
And we really appreciate Chris. Again, thank you so much.
My pleasure.